The sun over the Sea of Galilee could be merciless in late spring, white and flat and heavy, pressing down on the hillsides like a hand on a shoulder, draining the color from the scrub grass, and turning the pale limestone paths into something that shimmered at the edges. It was into this kind of heat that the crowds had come. Not dozens, not hundreds, 5,000 men. And that count didn't include the women, didn't include the children tugging at robes, didn't include the grandmothers who had walked farther than their knees should have allowed. They had come from the villages ringing the northern shore of the lake, from Capernaum and Bethsaida, and the dusty roads that wound down from the highlands. They had heard that Jesus was crossing the water by boat, and so they ran. They ran along the shoreline. They scrambled over rocks. They arrived breathless, sandals worn thin, carrying sick relatives on stretchers, carrying their questions, carrying the particular kind of aching hope that only the truly desperate know. Jesus had been trying to rest. He and his 12 disciples had slipped away after a devastating piece of news. John the Baptist, his cousin, had been killed. Herod's banquet. A dancer. A severed head on a platter. The grief was fresh and raw and real. Jesus needed silence. He needed the water. He needed space to mourn the way human hearts need space to mourn. But the crowd was already there when the boat touched shore, and when Jesus stepped out and saw them. This sea of sun-worn faces, this vast congregation of the hungry and the sick and the searching. The Gospel of Matthew says simply that he had compassion on them. He healed their sick. He taught them. He stayed, hour after hour, under that relentless sky, giving what he had, even when he was tired, even when his own heart was heavy. That is the world into which this miracle was born. Not a stage set, not a performance. A hillside on the northeastern shore of a freshwater lake, late in the afternoon, with the sun beginning its descent and 5,000 families starting to realize they were a very long way from home and very, very hungry. The disciples noticed it first, the way these things are often noticed, with a low-level anxiety that built quietly into something they could no longer ignore. The crowd wasn't thinning. The afternoon shadows were lengthening across the grass, and no one had eaten. Philip was likely the one to do the arithmetic first. He was from Bethsaida, just up the shore. If anyone knew the local geography, the nearest markets, the practical realities of this stretch of wilderness, it was Philip. And when Jesus turned to him and asked, almost as if testing the question, "Where are we to buy bread, so that these people may eat?" Philip's answer came quickly and specifically. 200 denarii. That was his number. 200 days' wages for an average laborer. Even that, Philip said, would not be enough to give each person even a little. Sit with that for a moment. 200 denarii. A working man in first-century Judea earned 1 denarius for a full day's labor in the sun. 200 of them represented most of a year's work. Philip wasn't being faithless, he was being honest. He was doing what reasonable people do when they stare at an impossible situation. He counted the cost, found it overwhelming, and said so. The other disciples were feeling it too. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each record this scene, and in each account you can hear the same note of strained practicality in the disciples' voices. Send the crowd away, they urged Jesus. Let them go into the surrounding villages and find food and lodging. It was a sensible suggestion. It was the kind of thing you say when you genuinely don't see another option. The day was fading. The logistics were impossible. The kindest thing, they reasoned, was to let people go while there was still daylight to travel. But Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, the quiet one, the one who always seemed to be finding people and bringing them forward, Andrew had been moving through the crowd. And he came back with something almost embarrassing in its smallness. "There is a boy here," Andrew said. Imagine the way he might have said it. Not with confidence, but with that particular tone of a man who knows the information he's carrying doesn't seem like enough. "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish." But what are they for so many? 5 barley loaves. Not wheat. Barley, the grain of the poor, dense and rough. 2 small fish, likely salted and dried. The kind of simple provisions a mother would pack for a child on a journey. The kind of lunch that barely feeds one boy, let alone one family. Let alone 5,000. The sun was still descending. The grass was still warm. The crowd was still there, restless, hungry, uncertain. And in the middle of all of that impossibility, Jesus said something that must have seemed, in that moment, almost incomprehensibly calm. Have them sit down. That was it. Not a long speech. Not an explanation. Just sit down. And something shifted. Because the disciples obeyed. They moved through that enormous crowd, spreading out across the hillside like shepherds organizing a great flock, and somehow, whether out of exhaustion or trust or simple curiosity, the people sat. John's Gospel notes that there was much green grass there. So picture it. 5,000 families, folding themselves down into the cool of the late afternoon grass, settling children in laps, spreading out the folds of their robes, a whole hillside of waiting human beings growing suddenly still. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish into his hands. He looked up toward heaven. He gave thanks. The Greek word is Eucharistio, the word that would one day give a sacrament its name. He blessed the bread. He broke it. And he began to give it to his disciples, and the disciples began to give it to the crowd. Here is where the story quietly refuses to explain itself, and perhaps that is the most honest thing about it. The Gospels do not describe the moment of multiplication. There is no flash of light, no dramatic pause. There is only the giving, continuous, unhurried, inexplicable. Loaves passed from hand to hand down the rows. Fish distributed across the hillside. And no one went without. They all ate. All 5,000 men, plus the women, plus the children. They ate until they were satisfied. That specific word, satisfied, meaning not just fed but full, genuinely full in a way that the hungry rarely are. And when it was over, when the last person had eaten and the shadows had finally won the hillside, Jesus told the disciples to gather up the fragments so that nothing would be lost. 12 baskets. 12 full baskets of broken pieces, left over from 5 loaves and 2 fish. 12 baskets. One for each disciple who had doubted it was possible. There is something achingly human about this story, and something that reaches far beyond the human. A boy who brought what he had. A crowd that sat down in the grass when asked. Disciples who distributed bread they didn't understand. And at the center, a man who had come to the shore grieving, who had no right to be giving anything to anyone that day by any ordinary measure, and who gave anyway. That is what this story holds, quietly, like bread in cupped hands. The world will regularly present us with a hillside full of need and a painfully small supply of what we have to offer. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Not enough. Never enough. And yet, what is placed in the right hands and lifted toward heaven and broken open in generosity has a way of becoming, somehow, more than what it was. The fragments that remain always fill more baskets than seemed possible.